And this is part 2 of the uploaded version of Shabbat service for Waymaker Messianic Jewish and Christian Center USA. It is Saturday, April 10th, 2021 on the Gregorian calendar, and it is Nisan 28, 5781 on the Hebrew calendar. And we're continuing with um, Parashat Shemini, and that means 8th, and we're going to be doing chapter 11. Kashrut for holiness. Adonai spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying to them, Speak to Bnei Israel, saying, These are the living things which you may eat among all the animals that are on the earth, whatever has a split, divided hoof, and chews cud among the animals, that you may eat. Nevertheless, you should not eat of those that only chew cud, or have a split hoof. The camel, though it chews the cud, does not have a divided hoof. It is unclean to you. The coney, though it chews the cud, yet does not have a divided hoof, so it is unclean to you. The hare, though it chews the cud, does not split the hoof, so it is unclean to you. The pig, though it has a split divided hoof, does not chew cud, so it is unclean to you. You are not to eat meat from them, nor are you to touch their carcasses. They are unclean to you. From all that you from all that are in the waters, you may eat whatever has fins and scales within the waters, in the seas and in the rivers. Those you may eat. But any that do not have fins and scales in the seas or the rivers, among those that swarm on the waters, or among any of the living creatures that are in the waters, they are loathsome to you. They are to be detestable to you. You shall not eat meat from them, and you shall detest their carcasses. Whatever has neither fins nor scales in the waters, that is a detestable thing to you. Among the birds you should detest the following. They are not to be eaten. They are loathsome: the eagle, the vulture, the black vulture, the red kite, and any kind of black kite, any kind of raven, the horned owl, the screech owl, the gull, any kind of hawk, the little owl, the cormorant, the great owl, the white owl, the desert owl, the osprey, the stork, any kind of heron, the hoopoe, and the bat. Well, now think about that. Those are things that don't even sound good, that we shouldn't be eating. All flying insects that walk on all fours are detestable to you. Yet you may eat from all the winged creeping things that go on all fours, which have legs above their feet with which to hop on the earth. You may eat from any kind of locust, any kind of katydid, any kind of cricket, and any kind of grasshopper. But all winged creeping things that have 4 feet are loathsome to you. Moreover, by these also you will become unclean. Whoever touches their carcasses shall be unclean until the evening. Whoever carries any part of their carcass is to wash his clothes and will be unclean until the evening. Every animal with a separating hoof, but not split, or does not chew cud, is unclean to you. Everyone who touches them will become unclean. So whatever moves on its paws among all animals that go on all fours is unclean to you. Whoever touches their carcasses will be unclean until the evening. Whoever carries their carcasses is to wash his clothes and will be unclean until the evening. They are unclean to you. Among the creeping things that creep on the earth, the following are unclean to you: the weasel, the rat, any kind of great lizard, the gecko, the monitor lizard, the wall lizard, the skink, and the chameleon. Among all that creep, these are the ones that are unclean to you. Whoever touches them when they are dead will be unclean until the evening. Whatever falls on them when they are dead will become unclean, whether it is any vessel of wood or clothing or skin or sackcloth. Whatever vessel it is with which any work is done, it must be put into water, and it will be unclean until the evening. Then it will be clean. Now, if any of them falls into a clay pot, everything that is in it will become unclean. and you are to break it. Any food that may be eaten but has water on it from such a pot will become unclean. Also, any drink that may be drunk in any such pot will become unclean. Everything on which part of their carcass falls will become unclean. An oven or stove for pots is to be broken in pieces. They are unclean and will be unclean to you. Nevertheless, a spring or cistern for collecting water will be clean, though anyone who touches their carcass will become unclean. If part of a carcass falls on any seed for sowing that has yet to be sown, it is clean. But if the water is put on the seed and part of a carcass falls on it, it is unclean to you. If any animal that you may eat dies, the one who touches its carcass will become unclean until evening. He who eats of it, its carcass, is to wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening. Also, the one who carries its carcass is to wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening. Every creeping thing that crawls on the earth is detestable. It shall not be eaten. Whatever moves on its belly or crawls on all fours and has many feet among all the creeping things that crawl on the earth, these you are not to eat, for they are detestable. You are not to contaminate yourself with any creeping thing that crawls, nor make yourself unclean with them or defiled by them. For I am Adonai your God. Therefore sanctify yourselves and be holy, for I am holy. You are not to defile yourselves with any kind of creeping thing that moves on the earth. For I am Adonai, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt to be your God. Therefore you shall be holy, for I am holy. This is the Torah of the animal, the bird, every living creature that moves in the waters, and every creature that creeps on the earth, to make a distinction between the unclean and the clean, and between the living thing that may be eaten and the living thing that may not be eaten. And that is the end of the Torah portion for this week. So to recap the Torah portion, to Shemini 8, on the eighth day after the tabernacle was first erected and Aaron and his 4 sons were anointed, the newly inaugurated priests began offering the sacrificial service. The first offerings are special, and Adonai gave specific instruction for it. And Aaron brings a young bull for a sin offering and a ram for the elevation offering, while the children of Israel bring a male goat for a sin offering and a yearly calf and a sheep for elevation offerings. Um, so the other thing that happens here is, as we go on with the Torah portion, is tragedy strikes. Even though they were given strict instruction about holy fire and um, unholy, or what was known as unauthorized fire, 2 of the sons of Aaron brought unauthorized fire in Adonai's presence. Nadab and Abihu, they took it upon themselves to offer incense that was not part of the commanded service. And God was very, very distinct about what he wanted from Aaron and his sons. So God consumed them by fire, and that left 2 sons for um, the priesthood. That was Eleazar and Ithamar, were the 2 left of Aaron's sons. And Moses confronted them because they didn't eat the sin offering they were supposed to eat. And then Aaron argued and gave the statement because of bereavement that they acted correctly, and Moses accepted that explanation. Then we end by going through the laws of the kosher animals. This is kashrut, what is clean and unclean, and this chapter lists animals, birds, and fish, which the Torah deems kosher or not kosher, clean or unclean, acceptable or unacceptable. And if you look at the animals, you can see why God was very specific with that and how it affects the human body. Um, what these animals consist of. I mean, look at the diseases that they also have. Um, So you can see why there were certain foods that were not permitted to be eaten. And when you look at some of the sea life that actually inhabits the bottom of the ocean. They're known as the bottom feeders. They actually, they feed off the waste of the ocean. So, is that clean for us? No. And that is why God was very specific with what is clean and what is unclean, what is healthy and what is unhealthy as well. So, that's just the long and short of the Torah portion. We are going to continue on with the Haftorah portion this week. And the Haftorah portion is 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse 1 through chapter 7 um, up to the 17th verse. The ark comes into Jerusalem. Now David again gathered all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000. Then David and all the people who were with him arose and set out from Baal Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the very name of Adonai Sabaoth, who is enthroned between the cherubim. So they loaded the ark of God on a new cart and carried it out of the house of Abinadab, and that was on the hill. Uzziah and Ahio, Abinadab's sons, drove the new cart as they brought it from the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill, with the ark of God, and Ahio was walking in front of the cart. Meanwhile, David and the whole house of Israel were celebrating before Adonai with all kinds of instruments made of cypress wood, with harps, lyres, tambourines, stringed instruments, and cymbals. But when they reached the threshing floor of Nashon, Uzzah reached out to the ark of God and grasped it, for the oxen had stumbled. Then the anger of Adonai was kindled against Uzzah. God struck him down there for his irreverence, so that he died there beside the ark of God. David was upset because Adonai's outburst against Uzzah, and that place is called Perez Uzzah to this day. So David was frightened of Adonai that day. Then he said, "How can the ark of Adonai come to me?" David was unwilling to move the ark of Adonai to him, to the city of David. Instead, David diverted it to the house of Obed Edom, the Gittite. So the ark of Adonai remained in the house of Obed Edom, the Gittite, 3 months. Meanwhile, Adonai blessed Obed Edom and his entire household. Then it was reported to King David, saying, "Adonai has blessed the house of Obed Edom and all that belongs to him because of the ark of God." So David went and brought the ark of God up from the house of Obed Edom to the city of David with joy. Now, when the bearers of the ark of Adonai had gone 6 paces, he sacrificed an ox and a fatling. Meanwhile, David was dancing before Adonai with all his might, while he was wearing a linen ephod. So David and the entire house of Israel brought up the ark of Adonai with shouting and with the sound of the shofar. But as the ark of Adonai entered the city of David, Saul's daughter Michal looked out of the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before Adonai, so she despised him in her heart. They brought in the ark of Adonai and set it in its place in the midst of the tent that David had pitched for it. Then David offered burnt offerings and fellowship offerings before Adonai. When David had finished offering the burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, he blessed the people in the name of Adonai Sabaoth. Then he distributed to all the people, to the whole multitude of Israel, men and women alike, to everyone a loaf of bread, a cake made in a pan, and a raisin cake. Then all the people departed, each to his home. David returned to bless his own household. But Saul's daughter Michal came out to meet David and said, "How the king of Israel distinguished himself today, when he uncovered himself today in the eyes of the slave girls of his subjects, as any vulgar fellow would shamelessly uncover himself. It was before Adonai," David said to Michal, "who chose me instead of your father and all his household, appointing me ruler over the people of Adonai, over Israel. So I danced before Adonai and will dishonor myself even more than this, and will be low in my own eyes. Yet in the eyes of the slave girls whom you mention, I will be honored. So Saul's daughter Michal had no children to the day of her death. Adonai promises Adonai's promise to Adonai. Now it came about when the king lived in his palace, and Adonai had granted him rest from all his enemies around him, that the king said to the prophet Nathan, "See now, I am living in a house of cedar, yet the ark of God remains within curtains. Go do all that is in your heart." Nathan said to the king, "For Adonai is with you." But it came to pass the same night that the word of Adonai came to Nathan, saying, "Go tell my servant David, thus says Adonai, are you to build me a house? Are you to build me a house for me to dwell in? Since the day that I brought up the children of Israel from Egypt to this day, I have not dwelt in a house, but I have been moving about in a tent, even in a tabernacle. In all my journeying among all the children of Israel, did I ever speak a word to any of the tribes of Israel, whom I commanded to shepherd my people Israel, saying, Why have you not built me a house of cedar? So now that you shall say to my servant David, Thus says Adonai Sabaoth, I took you from the pasture, from following the sheep to be ruler over my people, over Israel. I have been with you wherever you went, and have cut off all your enemies from before you. And I will make your name as great as the greatest on earth. I will also set up a place for my people, Israel, and will plant them so they may dwell in their own place and not be disturbed again. Nor will the children of wickedness afflict them any more, as in the past, since the day I commanded judges to be over my people Israel. So I will give you rest from your enemies. Moreover, Adonai declares to you that Adonai will make a house for you. When your days are done and you sleep with your fathers, I will raise up your seed, who will come forth from you after you, and I will establish his kingdom. He will build a house for my name, and I will establish his royal throne forever. I will be a father to him, and he will be a son to me. If he commits iniquity, I will correct him with the rod of men and with the strokes from sons of men. Yet my loving kindness will not be withdrawn from him, as I withdrew it from Saul, whom I removed from before you. So your house and your kingship will be secure forever before you. Your throne will be established forever. Just as Nathan spoke all these words and all this vision to David. That's the end of the Haftorah. Now, just as a review, in the Torah portion on the eighth day, following the 7 days of their inauguration, Aaron and his sons were beginning to officiate as priests. A fire issues forth from God to consume the offerings on the altar that were given, and the glory, the divine presence of Adonai came to dwell in the sanctuary. And as we learned, Aaron's two elder sons um, offered strange fire or unauthorized fire before God, and he consumed them because he commanded them not to do that. He didn't command them to do this, they did this on their own. And Aaron's is silent in face of this tragedy. Moses and Aaron subsequently disagree as to a point of law regarding offerings, and Moses did concede because the two remaining sons did not eat the offering they were supposed to eat. And then Adonai commanded the kosher laws, identifying what was permissible and what was not permissible, what was forbidden. Also in Shemini are some of the laws of ritual purity, including purifying um, the power of the mikveh, a pool of water, meeting specified qualifications in the wellspring. Thus, the people of Israel are enjoined to differentiate between the impure and the pure. So when we move over to the Haftorah, we see something else that actually parallels what happened to Aaron's sons, the elder sons, what happened to Uzzah, because God gave specific instruction on the care and the movement of the ark, and that no one was to touch a certain area. This is why the poles were there to carry it. But Uzzah reached out because he thought it was going to fall off the cart because the oxen misstepped. And when he reached out and touched the area he wasn't supposed to touch, he was struck dead. So there is a parallel there. So David was devastated because he wanted the ark to be brought to the city of David. And in the meantime, they had to move it to Obed-Edom's house. And Obed-Edom's, that whole household was blessed. So finally, David was able to bring the ark to the city of David, and there was a lot of celebrating. David was dancing. Michael, of course, was not happy with David, and he was dancing to the Lord with all his might. And um, actually, the Lord was happy with David's celebration, and kind of how it ended was Michal ended up being barren because she did not approve of David. Now, if you remember with Saul, Saul had taken Michal from David, and she and married her off to someone else when she had been promised to David. David ended up having her brought back to him, but all that had gone on with between um, Saul and David was pretty intense. Saul kept trying to kill David, or find ways to kill David, and Saul ended up um, in a bad way. Saul ended up murdered on the battlefield. Um, he had gone to actually see a medium for advice and to actually talk to the spirit of Samuel who had departed. And that is something that we're not supposed to do. And God actually, through Samuel told him, "Tomorrow you will be with me in death," basically. And what happened is Saul and his sons were killed in battle. We are not to consult mediums, uh, fortune tellers, anything like that. And actually, Saul knew that. Actually, Saul had uh, banished sorcerers, witches, and uh, from the city, and then he went and sought one out. So anyway, that's the long and short of that. So there was a lot of bad blood between. To make a long story short, a lot of bad blood between David and Saul, and Michal held that grudge towards David. Um, However, her brother Jonathan did not, um, but Jonathan had already been killed on the battlefield. Jonathan and David remained friends, until Jonathan's death. So anyway, that is the long and short of that. We're going to end this segment with prayer, and then we're going to take a short break, come back and do the Brit Kadashah and an altar call, and then close out Shabbat service for this week. Father God, we thank you. We thank you so much for this segment, for the example of following your guidance and not going off on our own, because we see what happens a lot of times if we go off on our own. Danger occurs, and sometimes that danger can be deadly. So we know that we need to lean into you and look for your direction in our lives in this world. And we thank you so much for that guidance and that direction. And we thank you for your word. We thank you for your presence. And we love you, Father God, in the mighty name of Yeshua, Jesus, Amen and Amen. And take a short break, and we'll come back with the Brit Kadashah, the actual second segment of Shabbat service for this week.